Hey guys, so today we are on with Lauren Bass, and we're just going to hear a little bit of her story with her family and her sweet little Parker specifically, and then just kind of whatever else is on her heart to share. So many of us moms know that the end, kind of that end goal, or what I think Laura and I were talking, like we don't really ever hit that place where it's like fully wrapped up in a beautiful bow, right? So many of our stories are still ongoing, but hopefully this just brings an encouragement to where Lauren and her family have been, kind of some steps they've taken to help bring some balance and some aspects of their family thriving, and just kind of what they've learned in the process, and then any additional encouragement that she would have for you guys today. So Lauren, if you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and then share a little bit of your story.
Hello, I am Lauren Bass, and I am going to talk about my son Parker. He is 3 now. He turned 3 in September, and I would say that since he was born, I knew that it was going to be a challenge trying to understand how to meet his needs and to make sure he was thriving. And Parker, he he struggled a lot as an infant, and I struggled a lot as a mom. There's so much information out there from day one, I feel like, of milestones and things that you need to accomplish. And I just remember trying to walk through like each month and trying to make sure all the boxes are checked, and the stress that you put on yourself, and comparing yourself to all the moms. I spent months in such anxiety and such depression over the direction that our life had been going, and it just got worse and worse. It felt like the further we got along. And for a while there wasn't any given moment that I felt like this was like I could point to, and that felt very discouraging. As a mom, you're just like, what happened? What did I do? How could I have changed this? And you just start into this spinning cycle. And I did that for months. And I know social media can sometimes be a hard place. And for me, it was in that way, but also that's how I found Emily. And that is the path that God has taken me down in order to get the help I needed. Emily, I came across you at a time, um, sorry, at a time that was right before everything just kind of blew up. And the timing of all that was so important, because having the people in place that God leads you to during the seasons you need them is just, I think sometimes it's really hard to silence all the noise, all the things you don't need to hear. Um, there are definitely things to protect yourself from. And I think looking back, I guess I should say a little bit about kind of what happened, but I reached out to you. I looked back at our messages. Parker had just turned 1, so this was almost exactly 2 years ago. And he was not really answering to his name, and he wasn't really, I couldn't give him like little commands and him respond to them. And I think I was also telling you that feeding had been an issue. He was only a year old, so I know some people don't worry about that until about a year old, but he just was having difficulties looking normal, if that makes sense, like just the trunk control and the swallowing, and that's kind of where we started. But then it just became, I think at like 17 or 18 months old, Parker really got very fearful of anything near his face, period. So putting anything in his mouth. And for months, he was kind of typical. He would put things in all kinds of things in his mouth, and you could just hand him anything. And he's just that little kid, like, to distract them, you just hand him something, and they put it in their mouth, or they just like look at it and play with it. And he was like that child. But then it became this really scary thing of the longer and longer we went without food, it got worse and worse and worse. And I know that, Emily, you were there when he was hospitalized, which was almost a year after we met. But it was just this like trying to work. And honestly, looking back now, though, in the moment, it was so scary and so discouraging. And as a parent, it's so helpless. Working through some of my son's health issues it's been such a mirror to my fear, and just I've spent years, probably over a decade at this point, trying to do all the things right, all the healthy things, whether it's like what I eat or the smelly stuff on my house, the fragrance and all the chemicals and like all the not good things. I've spent like a decade, and I felt like prepared for like knowing that like I'm a sensitive individual. If my children are sensitive, like I was ready. But then when you become a parent, you're like not ready, for the thing. Like you can't be ready, And I think as a parent, it was just important for one, if I could have an encouragement for people who are just struggling with health things, it's that one, it is such, you have to realize that like you can't control everything. Trying to control it is just like some illusion, I think. um but lean on the people that God puts in your life,
Mhm.
and pray a lot, and then just know that it's a season. Everything comes in seasons, and it's not going to last forever. And don't get so caught up in like all the milestones and things, because I think that stressed me out so much. What you said something to me, Emily, what was it? That like look for their heart or something along those lines. It was like search for, I feel like you said it a few times. It was like a phrase that like, you used. That was just like basically it just was like it kind of grounded me in the fact that like, okay, maybe this doesn't look the way I thought it was going to. Maybe I'm letting go of some of the visions I had of what motherhood would look like, or what my child would look like, or how they would act.
Mhm.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I had to let go of some of that. There is a grieving process to it.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes you're looking around like everyone else, everyone else but me. That's what it feels like. Um, and with the eating thing, I've had since Parker, I had recently started sharing Parker's story,
Mhm.
and I wasn't ready for a long time, but knew I needed to because people need to hear it. And I had so many mamas reach out to me that are grandparents, family members, scared because food is such a primal need,
Yes.
Why
Yeah.
is my child not eating? Like that just seems,
Mhm.
do they have no will to live? That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
To refuse such a basic need at such a young age.
yeah,
Right. And you can't, it's one thing like in the wellness space, I think so often we're trying to be like, okay, my kid's gonna grab the sugar. What am I gonna replace it with?
yeah,
Or my kid wants the bubble bath. Like, what am I gonna replace it with? And so often we're trying to say like, here's what the world is giving them, or here's what is normal for everyone else. And we're saying, no, just because everyone else, thinks this is normal, we're going to protect our kids and give them better choices. But some people, like your situation, it was you were just trying to get your child to eat, to put food in his mouth. Like that's not choosing a better thing versus a worse thing. Like you were just trying to get him to want to survive.
right.
Yeah. And that was at a young age, right? I think sometimes you see this in kids who are more teenagers and college age, and there's a lot more to that, but to see it at such a young age and not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah, it's been still, like you said, I can't wrap this story up in a bow because we're still dealing with it.
Yeah.
Did we figure out a way to move forward, and not worry that he was, because there was a moment that you and I talked after he
Yeah.
was out of the hospital, like he was about to die. Like that is
Yeah.
how bad his not wanting to eat had become.
Yeah.
And before he was in the hospital, we spent weeks of just like 4 or 5 loads of laundry a day because he just could not keep anything in his body. It was terrifying. And it is so bizarre to think that like I had spent so much time on this healing journey, of like all the things that I was gonna like, how am I gonna navigate like keeping them away from sugar, and like don't start them too early,
Yes.
and these are the first foods, and like you have all this education of like all the
Yes.
things you're gonna do to like make them like this amazing healthy child, and like they're gonna be and they won't even put food in their mouth. It's
Yeah.
just like what is happening, and we're
Yeah.
still not on the other side of that.
Well, and to backtrack a little bit, I think sometimes what I find, I think you and I had this conversation even back then, was that wrestle between our own fear of the medical system, right? And sometimes it's like to knowing when to, right, ask for help beyond the holistic space, because he was at a point where something needed to happen. I remember
Yeah.
you texting me like, we're going to the hospital. And I remember our
Yeah.
whole family I'm like, everyone stop. We have to pray right now. Like, and I remember just my own heart of being like that mother heart towards another mother's heart. Right. And like, okay, Jesus, you're going to have to help make sense of this, because we're
Yeah.
by the book, you were doing everything, you know,
Yeah.
that we knew how to do.
Something else too that is so crazy to me is that I have heard several times since sharing about Parker's story too, that people are told, like a mom knows something's off,
Yes. Yes.
and they will talk to like their pediatrician. Like we Parker was my first child.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't been around a bunch of tiny, tiny kids. I probably around the age of 2 is like the youngest kid I'd been around that much. So I can't say like I know normal necessarily more than a pediatrician would. So when you go into a pediatrician by 6 months old, I would say we like knew for sure something was definitely off with Parker. But for a while, it's kind of like, I don't know, they're just kind of mush, like it's sometimes hard to tell and like what's going on. And the pediatrician said from 6 months all the way up until a year. And at a year, we got very concerned. Oh, let's just give it time. Let's wait. Even if autism is an issue, which that was the symptoms we were looking at, they don't really diagnose until age 3. Well, he's 1 right now. What do I do now that I'm concerned? And I've heard that time after time. I'm telling my doctor this and this and this, and
Yes.
I'm not getting any help. And maybe it's fine. And I'm like, if your mama heart tells you something's not right, something's not right.
Yeah.
And I wish I was so glad that there were people that were around me that told me that, because I didn't feel permission to. You look at the experts as experts. They're a pediatrician. They see kids all day long. And if they say nothing's wrong or it's okay, wait. I just wait then, right?
Yeah.
No, because pretty soon my son in my situation, it was very clear it was not okay.
Yeah.
So I just feel like if
Because he had to eventually have a feeding tube, right? And they had to give him nutrients somewhere else because he wouldn't eat.
Yeah. So we, when he went into the hospital, he was diagnosed with malnutrition and scurvy. So they gave him, vitamin B, vitamin C, and a feeding tube. And they had to be sure that like he wouldn't eat anything, so they went through all the things and eventually realized like we've got to give him a feeding tube. So he did come home with a feeding tube. He would not, the feeding tube food, you can drink it, but he wouldn't drink it. He was very selective with what he was drinking. So there was a night when in the middle of the night he ripped his feeding tube out. And I was like, oh, forget it. Because we just had some long, long nights. And this had been like 5 or 6 weeks of, I mean, not to throw a pity party, but shoving a tube down your child's throat and nose. Like I've watched adults and how-to videos just to make sure I'm doing it right. And even they are just having a very hard time with it. And just shoving it down. Oh, it was terrible. So when he ripped that out in the middle of the night, I got up the next morning, and somehow with this child who I feel like I could never tell if he understood anything. I looked him in the face. I said, Parker, I'm either putting this tube back in or you're drinking it in your bottle. And for some reason, he just decided he was going to drink into that bottle. In that moment, I was so grateful that he at least understood me enough to drink it. And so we only did it 6 weeks, thankfully. But yeah, that is what we had to do for a little while.
Yeah. So then I have like 3 questions that I'm trying to like, which pattern makes the most sense. Let's say from there, I mean, I think you shared a little bit of kind of like where your heart was in that place. In that moment, I feel like sometimes again in this space we can get really fixated or fearful around toxins and smells and fragrances and all that stuff, right? But in that moment, like that probably meant nothing to you, right? You're like, no, I just want him to eat whatever, right?
It's like you get so stuck on all the things that you have to do. And number one, it steals all the joy.
Yeah.
I feel like every child just knows, for the most part, at their core, just happy, playing
Yeah.
all day. And when you get stuck in all of that, you just rob them of that because you're so stressed over doing all the things. And I feel like there's a point where, yes, there was a moment of concern for sure. But also I think I spent so much time stressing him out unnecessarily with all the things, and I had to go through a process, and I don't know that I could have done it any differently until I went through it,
Yeah.
you know? So, like,
Absolutely.
looking back, like, I can't tell you that I could have changed it where I was and the growth that I've had since then. It's just where I was, you know?
Mhm.
Um, there's another part of what I was gonna answer about what you just said, but I can't remember what the other thing you said. Um, man, what did you just say? What did you ask me? Ask me again.
I should have wrote it down because now my brain, I was like really interested in what you were saying. Just the idea, I guess, of like, in that moment, how did you feel? Like, what were you thinking? Like, none of that mattered. Like, none of the
Yeah,
holistic
that's what
stuff
it was.
mattered. Yeah.
Not only was I robbing him of joy, but it was like after all that had happened, I looked back and I had cared nothing about where he was in his milestones. I was just glad he was alive.
Yes.
That's the thing
Yeah.
about someone who's like denying a primal need, or like a child who's just like struggling that hard, no matter
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
You just have to take a step back sometimes and gain perspective
Yeah.
and realize, like, I am just so grateful that he's here.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
breathing. He's
Yes.
okay for now. Like, is he thriving? Maybe not,
Yeah.
but he's okay for now,
Hmm.
and I have to protect him in a way because that's my responsibility. I can't put all of my fears and my concerns on him who has no idea of all the ways my head's spinning right now,
Yes. Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of my job to do that in a way because he's a
Hmm.
child and he looks to me for
Yeah.
not only regulation, but just, mama, tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And you can't just let yourself fall apart.
Yes.
But it happens sometimes. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
if I told you this, but when he went to the hospital, it was such this buildup of
Mhm.
stress and trying to hold it together that when he got to the hospital, I remember we got into the ER, and I knew that we were going to be there for several days. The first time we went to the ER, they sent us home.
I remember that. Yeah.
I was scared for like 3 days, 2 days, and we went back, and I knew we were not coming back home until we figured this out. So I'm lying on the table with him, waiting for a doctor to come in, and I'm feeling worse and worse and worse. I have the chills, and I'm shaking. And so when the doctor comes in, I ask them to take my temperature when they take his, and it's at like 103.5. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go sit in the car because it can be a process being at the doctor.
Yeah.
And so I feel worse and worse and worse until I'm like physically weak. And I tell my husband I'm going to drive myself home. And I get myself to the car and I know I can't get myself home. So I
Hmm.
had to call an Uber to take me home. Like, I was stressed, this accumulation of stress over
Yeah.
time. And then I
Yeah.
was in bed while my poor child was in the hospital. And he's pulling down masks of every woman with brown hair, trying to
Mm,
figure out where his mom is. And
mm,
it just was this like failure moment. I feel like that happens though sometimes. It's
yeah.
like I can't be all the things I thought I was gonna be, and
Yeah.
sometimes it is out of your control, and you can't just I don't know how to say that, like, as a mom, especially a first time mom with this situation going on, I just put myself in a place, even on relying on God. I guess I just thought, like, I was gonna figure it out. I don't know. I
Yeah.
just put myself in a place I didn't belong, instead of, I don't know if I'm making sense at all.
Yeah. Well, and tell me if this is kind of that thought pattern that you have is that I think what can happen sometimes is when we start to like it's this interesting transition, and I don't know if I have great words for it, but I see this in myself, I see this in other moms where we start neglecting the like kind of mantle of motherhood that God put on us. We start almost neglecting those things because we're trying so hard to be all the other things we were never really not that we weren't created to care for them and love them, but we start becoming the professional in their life. We start becoming the practitioner in their life, right? And there, we are called to care and love. And there is a point where I think as moms, we do have a responsibility to be educated and to be kind of take on that ownership, right, of their health, and not just like hand it over to a professional.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like sometimes we get so focused, and I find this in my own life because we homeschool, right? So it's like I have to be able to lay down sometimes the practitioner mindset, the teacher mindset, the pastoral mindset. Like I have to like take these things that we've kind of deemed as professionals, I have to like set them down sometimes and be like, I need to be your mom right now. I just need to have fun with you and to laugh with you and to hold you and to let you struggle and to let you find your own way. Right. But like, I think that I don't know if you felt that or experienced that of like, I'm kind of missing just the motherhood piece.
Oh yeah. I get stuck in all the to-dos so easily. You know, I'll like go to play for a little bit, and then it's like, you know, I got to do all the things, especially like right now with all the supplements Parker is on, and I'm trying to like clean this and that out of his body and stay on top of it. Is it too much for him? And you know, there's like a schedule throughout the day, and sometimes I just like stop it all. You know, I just don't give him anything that day. I'm just like, I just need a day to like not stress over all this, because he needs me to be more present. And I've found a lot in motherhood that like worrying about all the things, and like I said, on some level sometimes you do need to.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
on some level you need to remember to take a step back and be present and to play with them and to help them. You don't want to put all that burden on them constantly, you know, no one can have that constantly.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree. You do have to take those hats off sometimes and just be with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think most of the moms I encounter, right, it's hard sometimes, even when you're paying a practitioner to like help you, sometimes it is hard to still like just be like, okay, I'm going to throw this back to you and let you process this and help me understand this,
Right.
versus like the need to try to like do all of it.
Yeah.
And I still remember a time where you and I were talking, and somebody else, I think you had been trying to seek, trying to figure out that was a good fit as well for him. And they were like, just go out into nature and like go hike for a while. Right. And you were like, he's got a feeding tube. Like, I'm just gonna go hike. Like, I don't understand how
Yeah.
that's gonna work.
Yes.
But I feel like all of this then led you to Dr. Josh in Iowa. So talk to us a little bit about how that process was, and kind of what some of those findings were for why he wasn't eating.
So pretty quickly, Dr. Josh ordered a couple of tests. I think one that we did with you, the oats test, and then he wanted a genetic test. And does the oats test for mold?
Indirectly, but mycotoxins would be more for mold specifically.
Okay, I think there was a third test then for the mycotoxins. He had several symptoms that Dr. Josh wanted to know, does he have mold toxicity? So we tested for that. We did genetic testing and then just a general oat test. And one of the worst Krebs cycles he's ever seen. Just that was really bad, really bad from the get-go. So he's got a hyperbaric chamber there, because he said at some point we're not getting enough oxygen. He said, I can't tell you whether it was during labor or, you know, he's not sleeping well, keeping his mouth shut at night. Like he's not getting enough oxygen. So we started on that. And then he was very high for a common household mold. So we started on a protocol for that, which you have to take slowly. When he was 2, pretty quickly after meeting you, you had recommended Dr. Josh. So he started last November. So he was just over 2 and 2 months. So we've been doing this a year now. And we're still, I feel like we just hit the cusp of getting past mold a little bit. So we've been working on it about a year at this point. Did we start working on it with you?
I think we were trying to, but we were trying to set some foundations in place first.
Yes.
And then he kind of spiraled, and we're like, who cares, right, about mold at this point? The poor guy isn't eating anything. We don't want to detox him at that point. Yes. Yeah. And he was so little.
Yes.
Which again makes sense from an oxygen perspective, right? Mold can just start to steal. I say we just don't breathe well. I feel like moldy people don't breathe well.
Oh, it's that air hunger. You can see him do it. It less. but you can see
Yeah.
him do it. It's just like all of a sudden he gasps for air.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but we saw really
Yeah.
high mold. He has extremely high histamines, but he also had a MTHFR gene mutation. It
Mhm.
only came from one person, not from both of us. So I guess that's better than from both of us. But he's still like, as far as methylation and breaking things down, we made some shifts.
Mhm.
Um, Dr. Josh actually told us most of what he's eating is probably triggering because of that. This is another thing I have to really work on and let go of. What he's
Mhm.
eating right now is not great for his gene mutation as far as methylation goes.
Sure.
Um, and that is really hard on me because I know every day he's eating something that is triggering more histamines and making him more uncomfortable. Because with the high histamines, it's one of the hardest things as a parent, I feel like thus far, is the no sleep thing. High
Yeah.
histamines make it that he's never slept super well, except very
Mhm.
recently. Anyways, I think he's like just on the cusp a little bit of some of this, but I don't know if that answers your question with all the things Dr. Josh found, but we
Yeah.
need to do that testing to understand neurologically like
Mhm.
what's affecting him.
Yeah, yeah, because I think that at one point before you had seen Dr. Josh, our conversation was like, I really think that it's neurological. I don't think it is,
You had said that.
there's a whole bunch of other things I think that were maybe on the table. And,
Yeah.
and I think that it really appeared like he needed to see a functional neurologist to be able
Yes.
to assess, right? I love what I do and I love the virtual aspect, but there are some moments where you need hands-on physical
Yeah.
touching, and he needed those adjustments and he needed those therapies, right? Because Dr.
Yeah.
Josh also, because there's stability sometimes, again, with histamine issues, mold issues, like those things are sometimes can be addressed without needing additional therapies and interventions. And then some
Right.
kids and adults, like he needed that in order to get to work through some of the foundational supplements and diet things. He needed the treatment
Yeah.
that Dr. Josh could offer.
Oh, and the primitive reflexes.
Yes.
He had a lot. I don't know how many there are. I think somewhere in the teens, 15, 16 of them maybe. He had a lot of them still retained. And I knew they had been there are different reasons Dr. Josh talks about that this can happen, like a traumatic event like Parker being hospitalized could have triggered
Sure.
several of them to turn back on. But I knew that several of them had been there since birth and just had never gone away.
Yeah.
Um,
Because you had always seen those symptoms, right? It's not like he was
yes,
functioning and
right,
thriving and everything, and then all of a sudden after an
right.
event, you started seeing those come back. Like
No, yeah.
something had always been off.
Yes, for sure. I saw a lot of course, I didn't know what they were at the time, but
Right.
Dr. Josh is really big on the primitive reflexes and how that can really, really affect. And now at this point, when I've seen so many testimonies, I see it's a huge deal that
Yeah.
Parker had some of those and they were very, very strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically what we were working on. And we went home with exercises. So it was like he continued over time, even after seeing Dr. Josh initially, that week intensive it continued over months and it was actually pretty immediate after we came back. It was probably the first week was the first time I felt like Parker ever showed us anything he knew. You know
Mm.
how babies will like mimic your facial
Yes.
expressions and like people talk about like, oh, kids pick stuff up like a sponge. Parker didn't.
Yeah.
And if he did,
Yeah.
he couldn't show us.
Yeah.
I'm sure he did. I should say that. I'm sure
Sure.
he did. He
Sure.
just didn't show us. But after seeing Dr. Josh was the very first time he ever showed us that he could do
Mm.
anything because he would shove your hand towards everything. So even if there was something he knew, he wouldn't do it for some
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was just
Yeah.
he's exploded since then.
I love that. That was going to be my follow-up question is where, obviously, right, on this side of heaven, there will always be some dysfunction, right? But the goal is to thrive in the way that, in the best way that we can offer for our kids. So that being said, where's Parker now?
So there are I would say that eating was the big regression. Like with autism, I feel like you just hear about regression. Like, and some people can pinpoint it to a moment. And with Parker, that wasn't really the case. But there were some things that, especially with eating and putting things towards his mouth, that did regress.
Mhm.
And he did feeding therapy for over a year. It was really not much progress at all. I think the only progress he really made was because there was like a stranger trying to shove stuff in his face, so he was trying to like deny it because he's a very sweet kid. But like with us at home, he was
Yeah.
not really making progress.
Yeah.
But recently, he will at least touch food now, and he kind of makes a face, but before he wouldn't really touch food. And he having his hands in his mouth has been a big deal, because having your hands safe around your face, at least,
Mhm.
maybe not my hands, is a big deal. So he will touch most textures now, which was
That's
it's
awesome.
big for
Yeah.
him. He's
Yeah.
not eating them yet, but he will put them up to his face. So
Yeah.
that feels like something small, but if you have a child that doesn't eat, it's just tiny little baby steps, but that's where we are with feeding.
Mhm.
Um, he was tripping and falling like often, getting ear infections all the time. I don't know if the tripping falling was solely ear infection stuff, but like he doesn't get ear infections anymore. We were constantly dealing with that for a while. He's so much more stable in the way he walks. He also, like, when he was hospitalized last year, they told us, one of the first things you want for a baby that starts eating to successfully gag things back up is they need trunk control. When
Mhm.
he went to the hospital at almost 2 years old, he still did not have great trunk control,
Mhm.
but now his trunk control is a lot better.
Mhm.
So it feels like it's a lot safer at this point. If he were to start eating, he could gag something back up. So there are just certain things that we needed in place, and that
Yeah.
is finally coming around too. Um, what else? Oh, he's looking us in the face. Like, let me give you an example. He has a baby sister now. She's 4 months old. At first, when she came along, he just like didn't want to look at her at all. And it's hard to hear a baby screaming and crying, and it's hard. Like, I tried to prepare him for it, but you don't know what he's understanding.
Right.
Um, well, recently she just stares at him. Like, he will, so he has a path sometimes, that he will run. And so the other night we were in our bedroom, and he was running from the bathroom over to this side of the wall, over to that side of the wall, back to the bathroom, and just making this triangle. And she's just watching him the whole time. And so he changes his triangle for some reason. He goes from here to there to here, and then runs out the door, and she starts crying. And then he comes back in, and she's like, "Oh, okay." And she watches him again. He runs out the door, and she starts crying. She does this like 5 or 6 times. And I'm like, "Parker, she's watching you. She thinks you're so cool. You're a big brother. She's watching everything you do." And so like he like acts like he doesn't hear me at first. But then recently he goes, like, I'll say it to him, and I know he knows what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I have had to switch gears with kind of talking around him
Mhm.
and trying to be sure he still hears my words, to talking to him and getting on his
Mhm.
level, because before it's like you stop doing things sometimes. Just even
Mhm.
obvious, noticeable things, because you don't think they're hearing you or seeing you. And for one, Dr. Josh told me from the get-go, he hears you. He knows what you're saying. So talk to him like he knows what you're saying.
Love that.
And
Yeah.
so it's hard. Like, even for a long time, I'm gonna stop and say I had a hard time feeling like a mom for a long time, because I don't hear mom. I've only heard
Mhm.
mama like 2 or 3 times.
Mhm.
So it's hard sometimes to just like snap into a mode of like, I need to do the normal things, because I think that
Mhm.
I have gotten him stuck on a path at this point, because I have seen small moments where I know he knows what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So now we're working on, no, I know you know what I'm saying. Now
Yes.
you look at me, because he can look at me, and he has
Mhm.
responded to his name consistently. That's another thing that has consistently moved forward, like the touching of the food. We haven't
Yeah.
gone backwards, and it might feel
That's
tiny,
awesome. Yes.
but he will turn around, and I know he knows what I'm saying at this point.
Yes.
It's just like it, I feel like that, like, your child is trapped in your body feeling
Mhm.
is starting to go away, and I can't express how
Mhm.
much better I feel and how much more hope I feel, because I feel like he knows what I'm saying. There's
Yes.
nothing worse than thinking you can't talk to them, or they can't talk to you, and all they can
Yeah.
do is cry when they're trying to express what's going on.
Yeah.
So that communication piece has been off the whole time, and
Yeah.
it's finally coming around.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to think of what else maybe has changed. The communication thing is huge though. Oh, something strange that's happened. Sometimes he'll go through phases where he just doesn't want to play with anything.
Mhm.
Um, I guess because of the low energy, I've had a doctor tell me, like, I'm surprised he doesn't just lay on the couch all the time and not have much energy to do anything. And sometimes he does want to just be like that sick day type thing, but for like weeks, that's all he wants to do.
Mm.
And lately he's just been so much better at being independent, and his language is exploding. Like, he is right now, he's at a stage where but he's 3, right? He just turned
Right,
2
right.
months.
You
3
have
months.
to remember that piece too, right?
Yeah. So he's like playing and singing songs on the piano, hearing tunes and finding them on the piano. He has all these
Amazing.
letters, and they will stick to the refrigerator. So he's experimenting. You know how shows will have like the same cadence. It's like
Yes,
DOG, dog,
yes.
CAT, cat. And so he's on the fridge. They're not words yet fully. Like, he knows a bunch of words, but he's experimenting. He's in an experimental phase where he's like he understands vowels and consonants somehow.
That's
So he's
amazing.
together and like putting the vowels in the middle, and he'll say the letters like GIX, and he'll like do this like he doesn't know what the word is. But I feel like he's gonna explode any day now with just like knowing all the things, because every day I'll come and he'll like have words on the floor, just a new
Mm.
word he's learned, just sitting
Mhm.
on the floor that he's just put together with his letters. And it's just really cool to watch. He's reading. He's been reading for
Yeah,
months, and
yeah,
it blows my mind how his brain is working.
yeah.
Anyway,
That's amazing.
I
I
don't know if
love
that answers
that.
your question, but
Yes. Oh, I mean, it's all so good and hopefully always encouraging, right? To hear where someone has been. And then I think one of the things that I would love to see, and I think moms do it, I think in this space, moms do it really, really well, um, is that we just to be able to celebrate with other moms, right? Because we understand, so many of us understand what it means to take for granted something as simple as hearing your child say mom, right? Like, that is a big deal. My daughter has struggled with reading, and even today, she was, had made, I mean, she's old enough, she's 11, right, to like be able to understand like it's hard. And I was like, yes, but what a cool testimony you get, that
yeah,
for so many people we take reading for granted because you just
yeah,
read, right? Your kid
yeah,
reads at a young age. Your kids, you don't have to like um you don't have to be like, go read a book, right? Because they're reading books because they love it and it's amazing in their imagination. And then for kids who like, it has been a long journey, like, she went and saw Dr. Josh for a week. Like, we've done a lot of neurological things, and with her, she was reading great, right? And then when she got
mm,
pandas, she regressed and stopped reading.
mm,
So being able to like walk her through that, it's these
yeah.
little things that you take for granted in a very we'll just say like normal child, right? And the thing that I love, and this was going to be kind of a question for you, is where have you felt that you have through this journey with him become more, like, how is that relationship from mother to child, like how has that changed or morphed, or like what are the beauties that you see in having to fight for him this way?
Hmm. How has our relationship changed? Like, me and him, like from the time we were struggling until now?
Yeah, or maybe even just like, I think, and sometimes like I see other moms, right? And the way they understand their children, I feel like is a little bit less than the way I understand my children. And I
Mm.
think I've had to understand,
Oh,
especially my son, right, who communicated very differently than, like, let's say a nephew or another friend, right? And so they have their own, like, they definitely parented differently than I parent. And I think a lot of that parenting is because of the journey we've been on and the way I've had to lean in and be able to um communicate differently, right? Like, I had to seek their heart, I had to understand what they were communicating.
that's
And
it.
so
Seek their
there you
heart.
go, there we go, it would come back eventually.
I knew it was gonna come out.
You just got to talk long
I
enough.
was close enough.
But how do you feel in this journey with him, that kind of, what have you learned, maybe is a better question, like in terms of being a parent, maybe differently? You said you've had to grieve some of the ways, right, that you thought parenting would be. What are some beauties you see on this end because of the struggle? What might you not have if the struggle hadn't been there?
I would be a completely different mom. I just know
Yeah,
it for sure.
yeah,
You take the ways that Oh, I could go into a hole. This is like a rabbit trail for me, this question. I have to try to reel that in because my brain just went, oh my gosh. All the things. Um, I don't know if you felt this, but I think there is kind of a change. Maybe it's as we and our children need more grace. I don't know, as health changes, as the world has changed over the last few years. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think that all as a whole, because we're not like an island, like we are so
Mhm.
affected by way more than just what this little thing is that's going on with my son. If that makes any sense. I'm sorry. My brain
No, you're good. Keep going, girl.
I'm reeling them in to small. Uh I just think that it has made me realize like how important it is to be human. Is that the word? Just I have spent a lot of time in the last few months realizing how much PTSD Parker probably has.
Mm,
Like this was not just hard on me, number one. I think that number one, I realized like it was not just like me and my husband going through a hard time. Like Parker was in it. It's his
mhm,
little body, And I think that sometimes when your world just feels chaotic and you can't control it, you can't rein it in, fear and frustration and anger will just erupt.
mhm,
But not because you're mad, but just
mhm,
because you just feel so helpless.
mhm,
And I've had moments where I just had breakdowns, that I'm trying to go back and apologize for, just the moments of like, oh, I'm so sorry that I wasn't like, I just emotionally was not there to
mhm,
be who I need to be for my son. Uh, and it has matured me in that way of, um, for one, learning that like I have to regulate better. I
mhm,
have to learn that just because things are not in my control, like for one, I think it's okay to go to my child, even though he's 3 or was 2 at the time, and be like, buddy, I am having a really hard time with this, and I am sorry. I am we are doing the best we can. I know you're struggling with this and that, and I've gotten way better at that. Just trying to, even if I don't think he fully understands, because he's 3, um, just communicating because it matters. Like it work helps me sort through it. It helps him sort through it. Um, and just trying to maybe heal some of those wounds of like just not being the best parent, because I just was not as I just had to go through the growth process, and I know
yeah,
he doesn't get that fully, but trying to talk to him on that level, and honestly, I think it's made a difference.
yeah,
Trying to be like, I'm so sorry for where I failed you,
mhm,
but I'm gonna be better, But I also you hear with autism a lot of times, or I have that they don't want to be snuggly, they don't want to be touched. But there were so many times where all I could do in the moment was just grab him and hold him and start singing to him, which luckily he loves music. But I would just start singing or humming a song and it would calm him down and he would just eventually melt into me.
mhm,
And I don't come from a very like affectionate family and that has had to change because he needed me in that way.
yeah,
If I couldn't vocalize it, if I didn't know if he was understanding it, at least he could feel it from me.
mhm,
If I could just hold him in the moments where we just both needed it. There were so many of those.
mhm,
And at this point, it's more words than that, but
yeah,
he's still affectionate and he still can come to me and
mhm,
just regulate that way, even if he doesn't understand and I don't understand, or that is the end of me. I'm not emotionally there yet, maybe, but um, just finding a way to just connect better, even if it wasn't through words. And I didn't feel
mhm,
like we were communicating the way we should. It was communicated better and better through time, that I'm here and we're working through this together, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. It sounds like, and I think that this is the testimony of so many, but that so often the Lord uses when we let him the experience we have to walk through in our children to actually heal some of the deepest places in our own hearts that we didn't even know needed healing, right? Like it exposes our fears, it exposes our lack of control, it exposes the wounds that we had before kids, because they're your kid and you want to fight for them, which means you have to recognize, right, where you need to be healthy.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I remember being frustrated. This may not feel on topic, but in saying what you're saying, I felt for years that I wanted to look a certain way because I was trying all the things. Like I had myself like on this pedestal of like, oh, I eat like so strict and I don't do all those things. And like, but I was so frustrated for a while because I didn't feel like I felt my best, you know? But it was because it was such an unhealthy way to look at all that. But I had to like completely deconstruct when I had Parker because it's like, oh, I'm so healthy. I've done this for like a decade. I'm gonna have like the healthiest child. And then I didn't, you know? And that like broke me, but in a good way because I needed that, you know? Like I can't be that person and shouldn't be that person that I thought I was gonna show up as and like have this better child because I do like the better thing, you know, like it was just healthy. But absolutely, it will highlight. I truly believe that God blesses us with the children he blesses us with and takes us on a journey. And you either get on board and you learn, or it's just destructive, you know? You just fight against
it's
it.
exhausting. It's like swimming upstream, you know, when sometimes I heard somebody say once that, you know, the Lord knows your heart before he knits together the heart of your child. And that idea that not necessarily I'm not saying that God creates illness and that God allow, you know, but not that he puts that on children, but regardless, right, to be able to see a child who has autism, to be able to see a child who's totally normal, right, normal by the world standards and thriving or whatever, right, and like no matter where you find your children, whether they're have a diagnosis, they're sick, they're unhealthy, again, based on, you know, what we would deem as putting them in that box, or if they're like, oh my goodness, they're, you know, they thrive at everything that they touch, regardless, like God created their heart with intention, right? And so that's part of what I have found. The journey in my kids being sick meant it actually gave me an invitation to dive deeper into their hearts to understand, right? Who are you? I always feel like people are there's three parts to every person. And so as a practitioner, I have to say, what is biochemically imbalanced? Because we can change that. What is character development? In which case, like you're just immature and right, there's just development and we can give you grace in this. And then who actually have you been created to be? Because sometimes we look at the personality and we're like, oh, that personality fits this symptom. It's like, maybe, but maybe that's also just how God created them. And if he created them that way, like, what is it rubbing against the parent where the parent's like, that needs to change? And we're like, but maybe the Lord's inviting you into letting that particular area, because this is who he made them to be, right? Rub a little bit against your own wounds and hurts and unhealthiness.
Yeah, for sure. I have had people ask me, this may not be something you want to get into. I've had people ask me like, how can I made a video about my son and in part of his journey, and I said God was good. And I had people ask me, you know, you've had such struggle. How can you say that? And the thing is that I think that a lot of times in life, it's perspective, your heart posture. And I think that, you know, we don't live in a utopia this side of heaven. Everyone, there's no one that escapes this life without pain. But the thing is that if we did live in a utopia, there's a reason there's movies about this, you know, where they go from like the perfection to real life, because real life is where we live, you know, that is how we grow. I don't want to stay the same person I was before I had Parker. If not for the experiences with Parker, I would not be who I am today. And that's a better version of me than before. So yes, I say God is good because he's the one I look to. This is the direction I'm going. And if I see that this direction I'm going is better than where I was back there, then I'm going to keep saying he's good.
I love that, right? It surpasses our feelings. So last final question, which is kind of a two-part question, because I know I want to be respectful of your time, and I so appreciate you just getting on and sharing, because I think it's just such an encouragement of all the things, right? All the things on your heart, because like you said, like God birthed something out of this.
For sure.
And but the question would be, I guess, what encouragement would you give to somebody who feels like the world feels really dark and scary and hard, and right, they're watching their kid walk through something really difficult?
Oh, how do I put that in words? I feel like I've tried to convey in a couple different ways how to answer this, but maybe I'm not answering it very well. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm gathering my thoughts here.
You're so good. Take your time. I know it's a loaded question.
I just are you cutting certain parts of this?
I don't know. You were, but don't worry about it, right? This is the beauty. Again, these are like conversations between moms. We're good.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I don't know if this is even helpful though. It's just sometimes things feel so big, and not that they're not. It is big.
Yeah.
It's really hard, but sometimes it's like, okay, our life keeps moving forward, right? Regardless, and it has to work itself out. You know, like at each spot we're in like that, it can't be like that forever, right? And maybe that's a silly way to think about it, but for me, it's like at some point, I know that this feels really hard right now. Just like when your children are tiny, it's really hard, but you know it's so fleeting, and that if you can, number one, instead of just feeling so consumed by just the hard that's going on in your life, just try to find any little thing to be grateful for. I know it sounds so silly, but in the moment, that was really helpful to me, because all I wanted to do was cry out to God and be angry and just, why me? Why do I have to do this? Why does it have to be us? Why can't we just be normal type of feeling, you know? But in the moment, it was like, maybe it's a fake it till you make it. I don't know, because I definitely felt it after that moment that I was telling you, like, I was just grateful he was alive, you know, because I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes when you're in the middle of the hard stuff, you can't wait to get to the other side, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that during the middle, when you're waiting, it's not like really waiting, because it's so important what you do there in the middle.
Yes.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, 100%. Like it sounds like in the midst of the storm, you learn to keep yourself grounded in certain things, right? Like God is still good. Like, doesn't matter how I feel, God is still good.
Yeah.
And I am thankful, right? You sat in thankfulness of like, he's alive.
Yeah.
It might be hard, but he's alive. And so there's almost those grounding moments, because in the fire, it is doing something in us.
Right.
And so how do we get through the fire? And it is having those, tell me if I'm understanding this correctly, the way you're saying it, right? Is the like, but in the moment, like, what are you grounded to? Find something to be grounded to and be grateful for in the fire.
Right. Yes. Those are the words. You have to find something to stabilize you in that moment, or your head just spins. But also, like, we're just human in that way, you know, and it feels like those things will last forever, or you're never going to make it through it. But something I had to tell myself too is that, like, sometimes I fold. Like when Parker got to the hospital and I just I got so sick. I was in bed for days, and like I just folded in a way. And
Mhm.
partly that's human nature, I guess. Like
Yeah.
my immune system only could do so long, like I was
Mm.
stressed too, but partly I think I just folded under the pressure and I just felt like I can't do this thing.
Mhm.
The thing is that we are very capable of doing difficult things.
Yeah.
And it makes us stronger. It gives us perseverance. It gives us perspective. And I don't know if this is helpful because in the middle of it, it does not feel like that. And sometimes
Yeah.
you don't want to think this way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was so important for me to I had this theme song. Have you ever not during like the really hard time, but like have you heard Lion by Brandon Lake
Yes.
and
Yes.
someone else? It's like this fight song, right? And it's
Mhm.
like you have these I have had these songs that that God has brought to me at certain moments. If I just like if you just turn to him, like
Mhm.
he'll give you the comfort you need in the moment you need it in the way you need it.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if my encouragement is helpful to anyone else. It's just what I needed. I needed a
Mhm.
fight song. I needed something to tell
Love
me
that.
that I could do a hard thing and that not only could I, but I had to. Like you
Mhm.
have to keep moving forward and you have to know there is another side and what you're doing right now is just as important. So don't be anxious about like when am I getting to the other side because right now, what are you learning? What's he
Mhm.
showing you? Like how are you being refined?
Mhm.
I don't know if that's helpful. That was
Yeah.
my process.
I love that. That's great. I mean, I think you said it perfectly. I love it. Well, thank you so much for just sharing your heart in all of this. And I'm excited to see where just, yeah, how God continues to use this. Because again, right, there's none of us are at the end of that road. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing.
Thank you for asking me. I've enjoyed it. I appreciate it. I've prayed a lot about sharing. I'm glad to have the opportunity to.
Love it. Thanks.